back to Washington, covering Congress and the president's push for what he calls the one big beautiful bill. That budget bill adopted in the House after Speaker Mike Johnson and the president had to make some calls to Republican holdouts. After canceling the vote, the House sent members home just to have them return around minutes later and finish the job. So who held out only to get calls from the president? Well, here they are. In the end, everyone you see here switched positions, except for Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky there. He was the sole Republican member to vote no. Moments ago, President Trump got this question about what this bill means for your Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
The spending bill that passed last night aims to cut $2 trillion.
Right.
Can you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question. Okay? This will not be read my lips. It won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it. Now, we are going to look for fraud. I'm sure you're okay with that, like people that shouldn't be on, people that are illegal aliens and others. Criminals in many cases, and that's with Social Security. We have a lot of people. You see that immediately when you see people that are 200 years old that are being sent checks for Social Security. Some of them are actually being sent checks, so we're tracing that down, and I have a feeling that Pam is going to do a very good job with that. But you have a lot of fraud.
All right, let's go live now with CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, great to be with you. The president says they're not going to touch Medicare, Medicaid. Is this the last we're going to hear about it, though?
Probably not. What he has said today is something that he has been saying for weeks now, that he doesn't want to touch these programs. The trick is that this bill that was passed by the House last night, it does not mention Medicaid, but what it does do is it directs the various committees across the House that are dealing with spending cuts to find savings. And it especially tasks the House Commerce Committee, which oversees Medicaid, Medicare, and other programs, to find over $800 million in spending. So that's a lot of money. That's a lot of cuts that they want to make, and that money has to come from somewhere. So there have been proposals to at least look at Medicaid and other programs as well to see if there are ways to get those savings. Now, I asked the Speaker of the House, Johnson, yesterday if he could unequivocally rule out that they won't touch Medicaid. And he said what the president said today, which is that we want to look at waste, fraud, and abuse. The question is, if you tackle all of that, does that equal $800 billion in spending cuts and savings? That remains an open question. The devil is in the details, and you're going to see kind of this highlighted moving forward. And I should note, this is going to be a long process. What they passed yesterday was really just the start. It's just a blueprint, a framework. Now begins the really difficult work of actually putting in policy, and that also has to get a vote eventually too.
Yeah, speaking of that vote, Speaker Johnson receiving praise from the president with this Truth Social post, but this wasn't an easy win, to say the least. And now, as you mentioned, we got to see what happens in the Senate. Can we expect a fight?
That's right. I mean, before they can even get to any policy prescriptions here, you're right, they have to meld it with the Senate version, and they are two very different bills. So they are going to have to work on getting something that they can agree to. I mean, one sticking point is wanting to extend the Trump tax cuts, whether to make them permanent, whether to make them temporary. That's a sticking point, among other things. But looking at that House vote, Republicans could only afford to lose one vote yesterday, and they did. The margins are just so narrow. Their majority is just so fragile. So you can understand why we've seen the president issue executive order after executive order, working with Elon Musk to try to shrink the size of government. It's very difficult to get some of this stuff actually through Congress. But a lot of the priorities that the president wants have to be funded by Congress. So they have to pass something in order to fund what the president wants in terms of taxes, in terms of immigration, in terms of military spending and so forth. That has to go through Congress. The question is, can they all get on the same page? And we know that there is no political incentive at all for Democrats to get on board with anything.
Yeah, and I want to lean more into those federal cuts, Caitlin, because we're talking about this from Capitol Hill while real people in the communities across the country are really starting to feel the impacts of the president's positions. And we're seeing reaction at these town halls. I want to ask you about this town hall with the House GOP Vice Chair Blake Moore from Utah. He said this to federal workers. Take a listen.
I know I have a very unique district. It's a very strongly conservative district, but also a federal workforce district. And right now, those two are at odds because federal workers are kind of getting demonized out there in the social media sphere. I remember saying at the town hall, please don't pay attention to that. That's truly not the reality of what's going on. But that's unfair to you to say that because, like an email that you were told by maybe by your a superior or somebody within the organization that you work for, hey, you don't have to respond to this 5-bullet point email. Oh, actually you do, or you shouldn't, but on Twitter, on X, it looks like you should. I get the frustration. I've been very, very frustrated at this alongside you.
Yeah, this was interesting, Caitlin, because Moore was addressing the confusion over Elon Musk's email, heard, of course, around the world. And now, this is notable on Doge considering Moore's leadership position and the fact he's in a very red state, a very red district, and he's even expressing frustration.
Yeah, not only is he from a very conservative district, he's also a co-chair of the Doge caucus in the House. So he mentioned in that town hall that he was on board with the idea of Doge, but the way in which they are going this essentially with an axe instead of a scalpel is kind of the metaphor that we're hearing up here on Capitol Hill is starting to become worrying for him and some other lawmakers. This is the kind of age-old clash up here on Capitol Hill where you have conservatives wanting to cut the scope and size of government, but also fearful of those specific cuts in their individual states or districts and what it does to industries and jobs there. But what's new here is Republicans are in a little bit of a tough spot here because they want the federal government to shrink. They want the executive branch to have, some power here, but they're also dealing with some of the backlash in their states. Now, we're keeping an eye on these town halls to see if this constituent reaction, heightens. You're not really seeing Republicans up here, by and large, really, waving their arms around about this, but they are quietly and more subtly expressing some concerns. But also to pick up on Moore's comments about the ways in which federal workers have been demonized. And I should note, federal workers make, 80% of them are across the country, not just here in the DMV area. The way in which they've been demonized, he said, yesterday, we also heard from House Republican leaders who were kind of putting forth that rhetoric. And so there has been some concern about the way in which these workers are being treated versus the messaging coming from some lawmakers. And now we know that these concerns could continue, and we're seeing obviously developments here. And the big question is kind of how these lawmakers address it at home and whether it does reach a point where they have to become, the lawmakers themselves have to become a little louder on this.
All right, CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Great to see you, Caitlin. Thanks so much for being here.